When I returned from my daughter-in-law's baby shower, the first thing I saw was my life packed into neat cardboard boxes on the porch. My clothes, my photo albums, even the quilt I made for my late husband, all stacked like garbage waiting for pickup. A yellow sticky note fluttered on top. "Mom, it's time you find your own place. We need space." The handwriting was my son's. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake, but the locks had already been changed. "You've been quiet lately," she said one afternoon as we sat by the window of Rosie's cafe, watching the leaves fall. "Everything okay at home?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Just adjusting to company again." Marta didn't believe me, but she didn't push. That's what old friends do, they wait for you to be ready. The night that really changed everything came in mid-October. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner habit, even though Julia had cooked. "Oh," I looked at him, my son older now, softer around the eyes, humbled by life. "I never stopped loving you, Ethan. I just stopped letting that love hurt me." He nodded, looking out at the water. "I get it now. What Julia did, what I let happen, it wasn't about the house. It was about control, about power. Sometimes people confuse comfort with love," I said quietly. "They'll destroy anyone who threatens their comfort." He sighed. "I learned that the hard way." Silence fell between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that meant truth had finally been spoken. "Julia filed for divorce," he said after a while. "Said she couldn't handle the embarrassment anymore." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. "I'm sorry," I said simply. He laughed bitterly. "Don't be. I think she was right. We both needed to grow up." I reached over, placed my hand on his. "You're doing that now." He squeezed my fingers. "Thanks, Mom." And that night, after he left with the kids, I sat alone under the stars, watching their headlights fade down the gravel road. I thought about Daniel, about everything that had led me here, the betrayals, the lawsuits, the pain, and realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. Revenge had never been about making them suffer. It had been about reclaiming myself piece by piece until I could stand tall again. And now that I had, the anger had nowhere left to live. I started writing again, not legal letters, not plans for defense, but something gentler. Reflections, stories. Maybe one day I'd bind them into a book. Lessons from the porch, I thought. A guide for women who had given too much and were ready to take something back. One evening in late September, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. Julia's. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Margaret, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach us. I thought power came from control, but I see now it comes from grace. I'm sorry for what I did to you and to Ethan. I hope you're well. Tell the kids I love them. Julia." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and whispered, "You're forgiven." Not because she deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself walk out. That night, I dreamt of my old house, not the way it was at the end, cold and tense, but the way it looked when Daniel was still alive. The kitchen bathed in morning light, the smell of coffee and laughter, the sound of Ethan's small feet running down the hall. When I woke, I felt peaceful, not haunted. In October, I decided to sell the cottage and buy a small cabin farther north, closer to the water. It wasn't running away. It was moving toward something new. I donated most of my old belongings, keeping only what truly mattered. Daniel's photo, my mother's ring, and the quilt that had once been boxed up on that fateful morning. On moving day, Marta came to help. As we loaded the last box into the car, she turned to me with misty eyes. "You really did it, didn't you?" "Did what?" "Everything. You burned the old life and built a new one. I smiled. No, Marta. I didn't burn it. I just stopped standing in the ashes. We hugged for a long time, two women who had survived life's cruelties with their dignity intact. When I finally drove away, I didn't look back. The road wound through tall pines and golden leaves, sunlight flickering through branches like little blessings. Somewhere along the drive, I realized I was humming a song I hadn't thought of in years. The cabin by the lake was smaller than the cottage, but it felt like a beginning. The air was crisp, the nights quiet, the mornings filled with fog that rolled over the water like a soft blanket. I started each day by opening the windows, letting the cold air in, reminding myself that I was still here, still alive, still becoming. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch, pen in hand, and write letters I never planned to send. To Daniel, thanking him for teaching me strength. To Ethan, telling him I was proud. To Julia, hoping she'd find her own peace one day. And to myself, you made it. You lost everything. And somehow, you found yourself. That's the real victory. When winter came again, I didn't dread it. The snow on the roof didn't feel like weight. It felt like silence, soft and earned. One evening, as I watched the last light fade over the frozen lake, I whispered, I'm home. Not in a house, not in a town, but in myself. And that, I realized, was the revenge worth living for. Ethan and Julia were in the living room, whispering, their voices tense. I heard my name once, then silence. When I entered, Julia smiled too quickly. We were just talking about future plans, she said. Ethan looked at me, eyes darting away. Mom, maybe it's time we talk about next steps. Next steps? I repeated, frowning. He cleared his throat. You've done so much for us. But we've been thinking. Julia's business is growing. She needs an office space at home. If you're hearing this, maybe you've been where I was standing on a porch full of boxes, holding what's left of your life, while someone you love shuts the door. Maybe your betrayal didn't come with a note. Maybe it came with silence, with indifference, with the slow realization that you've been erased in your own story. I know that feeling. The disbelief, the humiliation, the loneliness that follows when the people you built your world around decide you're no longer part of it. For a while, it feels like the end of everything. But it isn't. It's the beginning of who you're supposed to become. We spend so much of our lives as women trying to keep peace, smoothing edges, biting our tongues, folding ourselves smaller, just so others can fit comfortably beside us. But peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. And the day you stop apologizing for existing, the day you say enough, something incredible happens. You start to hear your own voice again. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the steady hand signing your own name on a new lease. It's the calm voice that says, I deserve better. It's walking away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. Forgiveness came later. Not because they earned it, but because I refused to let anger rent space in my soul. You can't heal in the same place that broke you, but you can plant something new in the soil of what's left and watch it grow stronger than before. To every woman listening, especially those of you over 50 who think it's too late to start over, it isn't. You are not finished. You are not forgotten. You are not too old, too soft, or too broken to begin again. The years behind you are lessons. The years ahead are a gift. So take back your name. Rebuild your world. Pour yourself a cup of coffee in a kitchen that belongs to you. And when you look in the mirror, don't see what they took, see what survived. Because survival isn't the end of your story. It's the proof that you're still writing it. And if my story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your voice still matters, then stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to rebuild, more women to remind that power never leaves us, It just waits for us to claim it again. It might be better if you had your own place again. I stared at him, the words not registering at first. My own place? It's just that with Liam getting older and the baby on the way. Julia started. The baby on the way? I interrupted. You're pregnant? Her smile was tight. Surprise. The room tilted slightly. I sat down before I fell. A grandchild should have been joy, not a prelude to eviction. Ethan continued. We'll help you find somewhere nearby. Of course. Maybe Cedar Pines, retirement villas. They have beautiful cottages. Retirement. Villas. I wasn't even 60 yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows on the wall where Daniel's photo used to hang. I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady. Don't let them take what's yours, Maggie. But I was tired. I had spent a lifetime taking care of others. I didn't know how to fight anymore. The next morning, I found a small cardboard box on my dresser. Inside were my wedding ring, a few letters, and a sticky note that said, Thought you might want to start packing early, Jay. My hands trembled. The disrespect wasn't just cruel, it was deliberate. I decided to talk to Ethan privately. Maybe he didn't realize how Julia's behavior had crossed every line. Maybe my son, the boy who used to build birdhouses with his dad and write me Mother's Day poems, was still in there somewhere. I waited until Julia left for her prenatal appointment. Ethan was in his home office, papers and coffee cups everywhere. Ethan, can we talk? I asked, standing at the doorway. He didn't look up from his computer. Sure, Mom, what's up? Julia left me a note this morning about packing. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Mom, please don't make this harder than it is. You know she didn't mean it like that. She told me to start packing, Ethan. My voice cracked despite my effort to stay calm. This is my house. It was, Mom. His tone was sharp now. You signed the deed over to us last year for tax reasons, remember? My chest tightened. That was supposed to be a formality. I trusted you. He looked guilty for a moment, then defensive. You still live here, don't you? It's not like we've thrown you out. I wanted to scream that he already had, that every word, every gesture had been pushing me closer to the door. Instead, I just whispered, I see. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Julia avoided me. Ethan left early and came home late. Liam still ran into my arms when he saw me, his tiny hands clutching my sweater. I held him tighter each time, knowing that soon I might never see him again. Marta called one evening. You sound terrible, Maggie. What's going on? And this time, I told her everything. Every cutting remark, every silent dinner, every time they made me feel like a relic gathering dust. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Marta said, her voice low but fierce, You need to stop paying for that mortgage. I froze. What? You told me you still handle the automatic payments, right? For the refinance after Daniel passed? Yes, but then stop. Let's see how independent they are when the bank starts calling. I almost laughed through my tears. That's petty. No, that's justice, she said flatly. You've been their safety net long enough. It's time they feel what happens when it's gone. Her words stayed with me through the night. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. Everything in this house carried a piece of me. Every nail, every color, every corner. And they wanted me gone. The next morning, I logged into my online banking account. My finger hovered over the pause payment button. My heart pounded like a drum. I thought of Daniel, of his quiet strength, his steady eyes. Don't let them take what's yours. Click. My key, once turning smoothly, now met cold, unyielding metal. For 34 years, this house had been my universe. A white colonial on a quiet street in Cedar Springs, Michigan. Nothing fancy, but every corner held a memory. Daniel and I bought it when our son Ethan was just 5. Back then, the neighborhood was filled with children on bikes, summer barbecues, and the laughter of people who still believed in forever. We built our lives here, brick by brick, promise by promise. The screen flashed confirmation. The payment was stopped. For the first time in months, I exhaled. But as I looked out the window, the driveway already half empty of their cars, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace, it was clarity. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't just their mother, or their burden, or a woman waiting to be erased. I was Margaret Hill, and I was done being invisible. And, though I didn't know it yet, that single click would be the first domino in the quiet, devastating revenge that was about to unfold. The silence in the house grew heavier after that day. It wasn't the calm kind of silence that follows peace. It was the thick, suffocating quiet of resentment. Every word I spoke seemed to echo in rooms that no longer belonged to me. Julia's voice, once sugary sweet, now dripped with irritation. Ethan avoided eye contact. Even little Liam seemed to sense the tension. He clung to Julia's leg instead of running into my arms like he used to. A week passed. No one mentioned the mortgage, the deed, or the conversation we'd had. But I knew the clock was ticking. My absence at the bank's automatic payment schedule would soon catch up to them. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to see their perfect composure crack. Maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe it makes me human. 3 mornings later, it happened. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when Ethan came rushing down the stairs, phone in hand, his face pale. "Mom, did you cancel the mortgage payment?" His voice was half disbelief, half accusation. I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup. "Yes." Julia appeared behind him, her silk robe cinched tight. "You what?" "I canceled it," I said evenly. "If you want to live here, you'll have to handle the payments yourselves." Ethan blinked, his jaw tightening. "Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? The payment's late. They called this morning. If it happens again, it'll affect our credit." "Our credit?" I repeated. "You mean my mortgage? The one I've been paying for 4 years, while you both find your footing?" Julia's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You agreed to that. No one forced you." "I agreed because I thought we were a family," I said quietly. She crossed her arms, her tone dripping with superiority. "Well, maybe this is a sign that it's time for everyone to grow up and move on. We can't live our lives around your sentimentality, Margaret." Something inside me snapped. "You've been living your life on my sentimentality, Julia." My voice trembled, but not from fear. "On my money, my roof, my patience." Ethan slammed his hand on the counter. "Enough, you're acting irrational." I stared at him. My son, the same boy who once called me his hero in a school essay. "No, Ethan," I said softly. "For the first time in years, I'm acting rational." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Julia looked at Ethan, her eyes flashing. "She's lost it. We'll figure this out later." They both turned away, walking upstairs, leaving me standing in the kitchen shaking, furious, but strangely lighter. That afternoon, I packed a small suitcase. Not because they'd asked me to leave, but because I refused to stay under their roof another night. The house felt like a corpse, cold, drained of meaning. I called Marta. "Can I come over for a few days?" Her voice came through instantly, no hesitation. "You don't even have to ask. Get here, now." I left quietly. No notes, no explanations. Just closed the door behind me and drove away. The autumn wind followed me down Cedar Avenue, carrying the faint smell of burning leaves. I didn't cry. Not yet. Marta lived in a modest ranch-style home on the edge of town with her husband Peter. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and pulled me into her arms. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "They don't know what they've started." Her words hit deep. "I'm just Tired, I said. She led me to the kitchen, poured coffee, and waited. I told her everything, every cold word, every little humiliation. The way Julia had moved my things, the note, the new locks. When I finished, Marta sat back and crossed her arms. You've been paying for that house. You're not powerless, Maggie. You're just too decent to see it. I don't want revenge, I murmured. I just want my dignity. She smiled faintly. Sometimes they're the same thing. The next morning, Marta's nephew arrived. His name was Brian, a young attorney who handled estate and property law. He had kind eyes, but a sharp mind. I've heard a bit about your situation, he said, flipping open a leather notebook. You transferred the deed to your son but continued paying the mortgage, correct? Yes. After Daniel passed away from a heart attack, the silence in the house was unbearable. I tried to fill it with noise, morning talk shows, the radio, the hum of the washing machine, but there are silences that no sound can fix. Ethan insisted that I shouldn't live alone. Mom, it's not safe for you to stay here by yourself, he said, his hand on mine, his voice filled with concern. He and his wife, Julia, had just moved back from Chicago with their newborn son, Liam. And you have proof bank statements, receipts? I've kept everything, I said, pride creeping into my voice. Daniel always said to save every record. For tax purposes, he used to say. Turns out it was for survival purposes too. Brian nodded approvingly. Good, that gives us leverage. You may be able to file an equitable lien against the property. Essentially, it means you can claim back the amount you've paid even if the house isn't in your name. He blinked. So they can't just sell it? Not without paying you first. Marta grinned. Now that's what I call poetic justice. For the first time in months, I laughed. It wasn't loud or triumphant, just a small sound of disbelief, of life returning to my chest. Over the next few days, Brian guided me through gathering documents. I pulled out folders of payment records, mortgage statements, tax returns, all meticulously labeled in Daniel's handwriting. The sight of his neat pen strokes brought tears to my eyes. He'd be proud of you, Marta said quietly. I didn't answer. I couldn't. By the end of the week, we had a case ready to present. But before filing anything, Brian looked at me over his glasses. You might want to confront them first, Mrs. Hill. Sometimes, when people realize they're cornered, they make mistakes. Let them show their hand. The thought of going back terrified me. But fear, I realized, was the last chain tying me to that version of myself, the one who apologized for taking up space in her own home. So I agreed. 2 days later, I drove back to Cedar Springs. The house looked different somehow, smaller, uglier. Julia's sleek SUV gleamed in the driveway like a silver knife. I parked across the street, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I rang the doorbell, Julia answered. Her expression flickered between surprise and annoyance. Margaret? We weren't expecting you. I noticed, I said dryly. Is Ethan home? She hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner, sterile, impersonal. My wedding photo was gone completely now, replaced by a large black and white print of some abstract pattern. It was like walking into a stranger's house, wearing my own skin. Ethan appeared in the hallway, his tie loosened, eyes wary. Mom, this isn't a good time. It won't take long, I said. I just wanted to talk about the mortgage situation. His shoulders stiffened. We already handled it. We made the payment. Good, I said calmly. Because from now on, it's entirely your responsibility. Julia folded her arms. You've made that clear. I just wanted to be sure, I replied, stepping closer. Because I'll also be meeting with my lawyer tomorrow. Their faces changed in unison, first confusion, then fear. Lawyer? Ethan repeated. What lawyer? One who specializes in property rights, I said. Apparently, paying someone's mortgage for years while they live rent-free, can establish something called an equitable lien, meaning, before you sell this house, or try to, you'll have to deal with me. Julia's composure cracked. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Mom, why are you doing this? We're family. I looked him dead in the eye. You stopped being family the day you locked me out of my own home. He opened his mouth to argue, but Julia grabbed his arm. Let her go through with it, she hissed under her breath. She's bluffing. I'm not bluffing, I said, turning toward the door. And if you think I won't fight for what's mine, you never really knew your mother. Outside, the cool air hit my face like baptism water. My legs trembled, but not from weakness, from adrenaline. For the first time in years, I wasn't the woman who kept quiet for the sake of peace. I was the woman Daniel married. Steady, unafraid, capable. When I got back to Marta's house, she was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. Well? She asked, eyes gleaming. They're terrified, I said simply. Marta smiled, the kind of smile that only old friends share when justice begins to turn its wheel. Good. Let them sweat. That's step 1. End quote. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp autumn air. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes clinked like faint laughter. For the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't scared of losing my home anymore because I had already lost it, and somehow I was still standing. That night, as I lay in Marta's guest room, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed everything: the arguments, the betrayal, the moment my son chose comfort over his mother. I told myself it was temporary, just until they found their own place. But deep down, I was grateful. It felt like the house had come back to life again. The first few months were sweet. I woke to the smell of coffee Julia brewed every morning, the sound of baby Liam giggling from his crib, the warmth of family returning to the walls. I cooked dinner every night. Ethan mowed the lawn. Julia took care of the baby. It felt like old times, but beneath all that noise was something new. Resolve. I got up, found a notebook, and began to write. Not about pain, but about plans, about freedom, about what came next. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about taking my life back. And if they thought they'd seen the worst of me, they hadn't seen anything yet. The next morning, I woke before dawn. For years, I had woken early to make breakfast for others, Daniel, then Ethan, and Julia. But this morning was different. There were no eggs to fry, no toast to butter. Just silence, and a growing determination in my chest. The kind that doesn't scream, it hums, steady and low, like the sound of a distant engine right before it roars to life. Brian called at 9 sharp. Mrs. Hill, I've reviewed your documents, he said. Everything checks out. You've paid over $70,000 since the refinance. That's substantial. I've already drafted a preliminary lien petition. $70,000. I said the number out loud after we hung up, letting it sit on my tongue. It sounded heavy, powerful, like proof that all those sleepless nights, all that humiliation, had not been for nothing. Marta came into the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee. You ready for this, Maggie? I've been ready for 20 years, I said. We drove downtown to the county courthouse. The building was old, with marble floors that echoed every footstep. I wore my best coat, navy wool, with silver buttons, and held my folder like a shield. Brian guided me through the paperwork, explaining every step as if I were preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Once we file this, they'll be served notice, he said. They'll have 30 days to respond. If they don't, we can move for judgment by default. I nodded. And if they fight it? His smile was small but sure. Then we fight harder. When I left the courthouse, the cold air felt sharper somehow, more alive. Marta squeezed my arm. I haven't seen that look in your eyes since college, she said. Maybe she's back, I replied. That afternoon, I sat in her living room with a cup of chamomile tea, staring out the window. Across the street, kids were riding their bikes home from school, their laughter carried on the wind. Life was still going on, ordinary and steady. And yet, I was on the verge of something monumental. That evening, I decided to call Ethan. My heart pounded as I dialed his number, each ring pulling me back through decades of memories: his first day of kindergarten, his college graduation, the night he called crying after his first breakup. He answered on the fourth ring. "Mom?" His tone was cautious, distant. "I thought you should know," I said evenly. "You'll be getting a letter from my attorney soon." A long pause. Then, "Mom, please don't do this. It's just going to make things worse." "Oh, worse for who?" "For everyone," he snapped. "For the family." "The family," I repeated, almost laughing. "You mean the one that threw me out of my own house?" Julia didn't mean it like that. I felt my temper flare, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Ethan, you're an adult now. You made choices. So did I. And mine is to stand up for myself." He sighed, exasperated. "You're overreacting." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But I'd rather overreact than disappear." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking not from guilt, but from release. For years, I'd been silent. Now my words had weight. 2 days later, Brian texted me. "Notice served." From that moment, things moved fast. Julia called first. I let it ring. Then came a message, her voice clipped and furious. "Margaret, how could you do this to us? Do you have any idea what people will think? You're humiliating your own son." I played it twice, then deleted it. But beneath her anger, I could hear fear. That was new. That was progress. The next week, I got a letter from their attorney, a bland, condescending man named Roger Sims. He claimed I had gifted the payments voluntarily and had no legal standing. Brian smiled when he read it. "That's exactly what we wanted. They're underestimating you." He filed the response that same afternoon, attaching every receipt, every statement, every digital trail. "This will rattle them," he said. And it did. Ethan showed up unannounced 3 days later. I was in the garden, trimming the last of Marta's rose bushes before winter. When I looked up, he was standing by the fence, hands shoved in his pockets like a boy again. "Can we talk?" he asked. I wiped my gloves and nodded toward the porch. 5 minutes. He sat across from me, fidgeting. "Mom, you didn't have to do this through lawyers. We could have worked something out." "I tried working things out for months," I said. "I told my friends at church. It's nice having the house full again." They smiled, some with sympathy, some with envy. I didn't care. I had my family back, but like slow rot under polished wood, small cracks began to show. Julia had a way of saying things that sounded kind, but left splinters behind. "You don't need to tire yourself cooking, Margaret. We can handle dinner." Or, "Oh, you still use a landline? That's adorable." All it got me was a lock that didn't fit my key. He looked away, ashamed. "Julia, she gets anxious about control, about space, so you gave her mine." His face twisted. "That's not fair. Neither is erasing the woman who raised you." He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, please, we're expecting again. This stress isn't good for Julia." "Then maybe you shouldn't have thrown the person who paid for your roof out into the street." He flinched. I saw, for the first time, the boy beneath the man, the one who used to leave wildflowers on my nightstand every Mother's Day. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For a second, I almost softened. But then I remembered the boxes on the porch, the note taped on top, the humiliation that burned through my veins that morning. "Sorry doesn't fix $70,000, Ethan," I said coldly. "Sorry doesn't give me back my home." He stood slowly, defeated. "I don't know who you are anymore." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm the woman who taught you how to stand up for yourself. You just forgot what that looks like." When he left, I didn't cry. I went inside, sat at Marta's old oak table, and wrote a letter to the court clerk confirming my appearance date. 2 weeks later, the hearing was scheduled. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. No grand jury, no gallery, just a judge, 2 lawyers, and the quiet rustle of paper. Julia came in wearing a beige blazer, her expression polished but brittle. Ethan sat beside her, avoiding my gaze. Brian leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Truth's on your side." When the judge asked for my statement, I stood. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. "Your Honor, I didn't give them this money as a gift. I paid those mortgages because I believed I still had a home. I never intended to surrender my rights, only to help my family. That's all I've ever done, help them." I paused, meeting Ethan's eyes. "But helping people who use you isn't kindness, it's self-destruction. And I'm done destroying myself." The room was so quiet I could hear Julia's bracelet clink as she crossed her arms. Roger Sims, their lawyer, gave a smug little speech about family generosity and misunderstandings. But Brian dismantled it piece by piece, calm and precise. He showed the judge, the bank transfers, the mortgage agreements, even an email from Julia thanking me for keeping up with payments this month. The judge's brow furrowed. That sounds less like a gift and more like an obligation being fulfilled by Mrs. Hill. Roger stammered something about intent, but it didn't matter. The air had shifted. By the time we left the courthouse, Julia's face was pale. Ethan's eyes were glassy. Brian turned to me. "I'd say that went very well." Do we win?" I asked. "Not yet," he said with a grin. "But they're bleeding. And sometimes that's where victory starts." That night, I sat by Marta's fireplace, the flames flickering orange against the dark. She poured us both a glass of wine. "So?" she asked. I think I saw fear in her eyes. I said softly. Marta smirked. "Good. Let her feel a little of what she made you feel." I stared into the fire, the logs cracking softly. Revenge wasn't about screaming or slamming doors. It was about reclaiming power one quiet step at a time. The next day, Brian called with news. Their lawyer just requested mediation. They want to settle out of court. I closed my eyes, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. "They're scared." "They should be," he said. "If we settle right, you'll get your money back, and maybe more." That night, I allowed myself to cry. Not out of sadness, but relief. For the first time in years, I felt like Daniel might be proud of me, like I'd honored the life we built by refusing to let it be erased. I wasn't just reclaiming my money. I was reclaiming my story. And the woman who once walked on eggshells was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, steadier, unafraid. The tide had turned, and this time I was the one steering it. 2 weeks passed after the mediation notice, and every day felt like waiting for a storm that refused to break. Brian kept me updated with short, efficient messages. "They're stalling. They're nervous." But I didn't need him to tell me that. I could feel it in the silence. Julia stopped calling. The last voicemail she left was almost civil. "Let's be reasonable, Margaret. We can work this out privately." The word privately told me everything. She didn't want her perfect suburban image tarnished by a public court battle. She didn't want her friends from the Homeowners Association to know she'd thrown her husband's mother out on the curb like unwanted furniture. She never said anything outright cruel, but every remark was a reminder that my ways were outdated, my presence slightly inconvenient. Ethan brushed it off. "She's just trying to make things easier for you, Mom." But easier slowly became less mine. The curtains I'd chosen with Daniel were replaced with something she called modern neutrals. My framed wedding photo was moved from the living room mantel to a corner shelf for balance. Ethan, on the other hand, sent texts that swung between guilt and anger. "Mom, please, this isn't you. You're hurting the family. Julia's having complications because of the stress." The last one almost got me. Almost. But then I remembered standing on the porch that day, my wedding quilt in a box, the sticky note fluttering in the wind. Compassion is a luxury you can't afford once you've been discarded. When the date for mediation arrived, I walked into the conference room wearing the same navy coat I'd worn to the courthouse. It wasn't armor, it was memory. Julia was already there, sitting straight-backed beside her attorney. She looked flawless, as always, every hair pinned in place. Ethan sat next to her, his tie askew, his eyes tired. Brian placed a folder in front of me and nodded. "You ready?" "I've been ready since the day they changed the locks." The mediator was a woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a firm tone. She started with pleasantries, then dove straight into numbers. Brian presented the total amount I'd paid, $72,340, and proposed repayment plus damages. Roger Sims scoffed. "That's absurd." Mrs. Hill contributed to her family voluntarily. She wasn't coerced. Brian's tone was steady. "Voluntarily, yes, but not as a gift. The payments were made under a shared household arrangement, with the reasonable expectation of continued residence. My client was evicted without compensation." Julia's composure cracked for a moment. "Evicted? Oh, please. No one evicted her. We just asked her to consider other options." I looked at her across the table. "By changing the locks?" Her mouth twitched. "That was a misunderstanding." Ethan reached for her hand under the table, but she pulled it away. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the soft buzz of the overhead lights. The mediator cleared her throat. "Let's stay focused. Mrs. Hill, what outcome would you consider fair?" I took a slow breath. "I want my payments reimbursed, and I want the house taken off the market until it's settled." Julia's voice sharpened. "You can't stop us from selling our own property." Brian smiled faintly. "She can. The equitable lien automatically encumbers the property. Until resolved, no sale can legally proceed." Julia's color drained. Ethan rubbed his forehead, muttering something I couldn't hear. The mediator called for a short recess. As we stepped outside into the hallway, Brian whispered, "They're cornered. Don't give in." "I wasn't planning to," I said. We stood by the window, watching the gray sky churn. "You know," Brian said quietly, "most people in your situation would have just walked away." I smiled faintly. "I tried that. It didn't work." When we returned, Julia had regained her composure. "We're prepared to offer $40,000, she said briskly. "It's a generous settlement, considering the circumstances." I didn't even glance at Brian. $72,000, I said, "plus interest." Julia blinked. "That's ridiculous." "No," I said calmly. "That's math." Her jaw tightened. Ethan looked at me with something between disbelief and sorrow. "You really want to bleed us dry, don't you?" I met his eyes. "I want you to feel what it's like to lose something you thought would always be yours." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the mediator leaned forward. "We can reconvene tomorrow if needed." "Let them think on it," Brian murmured as we left. That night, I didn't go back to Marta's. I drove to the old house. The porch light was on, spilling a pool of gold onto the steps. Through the window, I saw Julia pacing, phone in hand, while Ethan sat on the couch, head in his hands. It should have hurt to see them, but instead, I felt detached, like a ghost watching the living reap what they sowed. I parked down the block and sat there for almost an hour, staring at the house Daniel and I had built. The house that had once smelled of coffee and cinnamon and love. It looked smaller now, as if their greed had shrunk it from the inside out. The next morning, Brian called. "They agreed to 70, he said, his voice almost triumphant. I laughed softly. "That's close enough. We'll draft the papers today. Once signed, the lien lifts, and the funds go directly to you." I hung up and sat in silence. I thought I'd feel elated, But instead, there was only stillness. Revenge doesn't bring fireworks, it brings quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm tears through and leaves nothing standing but you. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at Marta's door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, pale, his eyes red. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The lace tablecloth from my mother, too old-fashioned, was folded away somewhere I never saw again. And one morning, I came down to find my favorite armchair missing. "Oh, we put it in storage," Julia said, smiling. "The baby's toys take up a lot of space now." I wanted to protest, but Ethan looked tired. He worked long hours at the insurance firm, always glued to his laptop, his phone, his deadlines. "It's just stuff, Mom," he said when I complained once. "Let Julia do her thing." "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He stood in the kitchen, glancing around like a stranger. "I signed the papers," he said finally. "It's done." I nodded. "Good." He swallowed hard. "Mom, I know you think I betrayed you. And maybe I did. But Julia, she's pregnant again. She's scared. I was just trying to keep peace." "Peace doesn't come from silence, Ethan. It comes from doing what's right." He looked down. "I didn't mean to hurt you." You didn't mean to stop her either," I said softly. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "You won, Mom. You got what you wanted. But was it worth it?" I stared at him, my grown son, who once built Lego castles at my feet, who once promised he'd always take care of me. "I didn't win, Ethan," I said. "I survived." "That's not the same thing." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm sorry." For the first time, I believed him. When he left, I went outside and sat on the porch. The wind was cold, the kind that smells like rain and endings. Marta joined me, handing me a blanket. "So," she said softly, "it's over?" I exhaled, watching the breath cloud in front of me. "Almost. But something tells me Julia won't go quietly." Marta smirked. "Good. Keeps it interesting." We both laughed, and it felt strange, like laughter in a graveyard. 2 days later, I got a call from Brian. His voice was measured, but I could hear the undercurrent. "They tried to pull something. Julia filed a false claim, saying you'd coerced Ethan into signing under duress." I closed my eyes. "Of course she did. Don't worry," he said. "It won't hold. But it means another hearing." I almost smiled. Let her come. I've got all the time in the world. The next hearing was brief but brutal. Julia was radiant in her white blouse, all charm and crocodile tears. She spoke about family betrayal and elderly confusion. I watched the judge's expression harden with each word. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "I may be many things, but I am not confused. I know the difference between love and manipulation, and I know when someone has used me. Julia didn't just take my house. She tried to take my dignity. I won't let her have either." Brian handed over a printed transcript of her voicemail, the one where she'd said, "You're humiliating your own son." The judge raised an eyebrow. Within 15 minutes, Julia's claim was dismissed. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, local ones, from the town paper. Someone must have tipped them off. They asked if I wanted to comment. I smiled politely. "No comment. Just tell people to read the fine print before they trust family." The next morning, the headline read, "Mother wins house battle against son and daughter-in-law." I didn't show it to Ethan. I didn't have to. He knew. The check arrived a week later. $70,700 after legal deductions. Brian handed it to me with a smile. "You're officially free, Mrs. Hill. Free." The word rolled through me like sunlight after a long winter. That evening, I went back to the house one last time. The locks had been changed again, but this time by the bank. The foreclosure notice was taped to the door apparently. Without my payments, they'd fallen too far behind to recover. I stood there for a long while, the cold biting my hands, watching the house that had held my life now stand empty. I thought I'd feel guilt. I didn't. Julia had taken everything she could, except the one thing she didn't understand, that I could start over. She couldn't. When I turned to leave, I whispered, "Goodbye, Daniel. We're even now." The wind carried the words away, soft and certain. And as I walked down that driveway for the last time, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't rebuild what you've lost. It just clears the space so you can finally begin again. And for me, that was enough. Winter arrived early that year. Snow came before Thanksgiving, soft and relentless, blanketing Cedar Springs in a hush that made everything look cleaner than it really was. For the first time in months, I woke up to quiet, not the hostile kind that filled my old house, but the peaceful silence of a small place that belonged entirely to me. After the court hearings, after the checks and the headlines, I had taken what was left of my savings and rented a modest cottage near Lake Orion. It makes her feel at home. At home. Those words stung. This was my home, the one I shared with his father, the one I had paid off, one paycheck at a time, even when Daniel's business went under for a while. But I said nothing. I told myself it was just temporary, that soon they'd move out, and I could breathe again. Then came the suggestions. Julia would leave brochures for retirement communities on the kitchen counter. Bright places with smiling seniors playing bingo and doing yoga. White shutters, slanted roof, the faint smell of pine from the woods behind it. Nothing grand, but every inch of it was mine. I furnished it slowly, deliberately. A worn leather chair by the window. A small kitchen table I sanded and repainted myself. I hung Daniel's photo above the mantel, his smile soft, patient, as if he'd known I'd end up right here all along. For the first week, I didn't unpack everything. I just sat in that chair with a cup of tea and let the silence settle. The kind of silence that doesn't ache, it breathes. I realized I hadn't felt that in years. Marta came to visit often. She'd show up with groceries or cinnamon rolls or gossip from town. "Everyone's talking about you," she said one afternoon, laughing as she set down a bag of oranges. "Half the church thinks you're a hero. The other half says you're terrifying." I smiled. "Good. I can live with terrifying." She winked. "I always said you had it in you." We sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift through the pines. Marta reached over and squeezed my hand. "So what now, Maggie? You've won. What do you do after victory?" The question lingered in the air like wood smoke. I hadn't thought about it. Winning had become a goal, so consuming that I'd forgotten there had to be something after. "I start over," I said finally. "I build something for myself this time." She nodded. "And you'll do it beautifully." Oh. After she left, I took a walk by the lake. The water was half frozen, a thin layer of ice shimmering under the pale Sunday. My breath came out in clouds, and with each step, I felt lighter. The woman who had begged for space in her own home no longer existed. She'd been buried under that first snowfall, and in her place stood someone new, someone I liked. One afternoon, as I was trimming a small fir tree outside, a car pulled up to the cottage. My stomach tensed automatically, but when the door opened, it was Ethan. He looked older, thinner, and unsure of himself. "Hi, Mom." His voice cracked slightly. I wiped my gloves on my coat. "What brings you here?" He glanced around, taking in the cottage, the quiet. "I just wanted to see you." I studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance now, no defensiveness, just weariness. "How's Julia?" He hesitated. "She left. Took the kids to her mother's in Indiana. Said she needed space." I nodded slowly. Space can be expensive. He managed a small, rueful smile. Yeah, it can. He followed me inside. I made coffee while he stood awkwardly by the window, looking at Daniel's photo. You seem good, he said. I am. He turned toward me. I never wanted it to get that bad. I thought I was keeping peace, but I was just avoiding guilt. I know, I said softly. You were trying to make everyone happy. That's how you were raised. He winced. You mean by you? I met his eyes. Yes. And maybe that was my mistake. I taught you to smooth over pain instead of face it. I should have taught you to draw lines. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the silence. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed an envelope on the table. It's not much, but it's something. A start. Maybe. I looked at it but didn't touch it. You don't owe me money, Ethan. He shook his head. It's not money. It's a deed transfer. The house, it's yours again. I froze. What? He nodded. Julia signed it before she left. Said she didn't want to own a curse. I filed it this morning. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The irony of it all washed over me, how the house I'd lost, fought for, and mourned had found its way back when I no longer needed it. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Don't say anything. Just maybe forgive me someday. He turned to leave, but I stopped him at the door. Ethan. He looked back. I already did. The day I stopped letting what you did define me. He nodded, his eyes glassy, then stepped out into the snow. When the sound of his car faded, I stood by the window for a long while, watching the snow fall heavier now, thicker. It didn't make me want to cry. It made me want to breathe. That evening, I called Brian. The house is mine again, I said simply. He laughed softly. Guess you won twice. Funny, I said. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like closure. Sometimes that's the same thing. In the days that followed, I didn't rush to reclaim the old house. I had no reason to. The cottage was enough. I planted herbs in small ceramic pots on the windowsill. I volunteered twice a week at the library, reading to children. Sometimes I saw older women there, quiet, tired, with that same polite smile I'd once worn. I recognized it instantly, the smile of someone surviving inside their own life. Just in case you ever want a change of scenery, she'd say lightly. Or she'd mention that the stairs must be hard on my knees, that she worried about me falling. Each time, Ethan would stay silent, letting her words hang in the air like smoke I couldn't clear. I started spending more time outside the house, volunteering at the library, taking long walks through the park, joining Marta, my oldest friend since high school, for weekly lunches. Marta noticed first. One afternoon, I found myself telling one of them, a widow named Ellen, part of my story. Not the details, not the lawsuits or betrayals, just enough. They took everything I thought I was, I told her. So I became someone else. She looked at me, eyes wide. Was it hard? I smiled. At first, but once you stop asking for permission, everything gets easier. She nodded slowly, as if she understood. And maybe she did. The weeks turned into months. Snow melted into spring, and the air filled with the scent of earth and renewal. I spent mornings on the porch with coffee, listening to birds, reading the same novel Daniel once loved. Sometimes Ethan called. Sometimes he didn't. I learned to be okay with both. In April, I finally drove back to the old house. It had been cleaned, repainted, the lawn freshly trimmed. For sale again, but this time under my name. I stood there, looking at the "for sale" sign swaying gently in the wind. I didn't feel triumph or nostalgia, just peace. Before leaving, I walked around the backyard. The lilac bush Daniel had planted 20 years ago had somehow survived the winter. Tiny buds were just beginning to bloom, fragile, stubborn, alive. I knelt and touched one, whispering, You made it too, huh? When I drove away, I didn't look back. Some doors aren't meant to be reopened, even when you own the key. That night, Marta and I had dinner on my porch. She lifted her wine glass. To new beginnings, she said. I clinked mine against hers. And to never underestimating a quiet woman. We laughed, and the sound floated out into the evening, mingling with the hum of crickets and the scent of pine. Later, after she left, I sat alone under the porch light. The stars were faint, but steady. I thought about all the women I'd met, all the stories like mine that would never make the papers. Stories of mothers and wives and grandmothers who gave until they vanished. And the moment they finally said enough, maybe that's what healing really is, not forgiveness or forgetting, but finding a way to exist without shrinking. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living, and though the world outside was still cold, inside me, spring had already begun. By late summer, the lake shimmered gold in the evenings, and my cottage smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. The days had grown longer, slower, quieter. I'd started to measure time, not by appointments or court dates, but by the way the light shifted through the trees. Peace, I discovered, doesn't come all at once. It sneaks in quietly, like a cat curling up on your lap, purring until you finally notice it's there. The house in Cedar Springs sold in July. I didn't even attend the signing. Brian handled everything, and the funds went straight into a savings account I named Freedom. He laughed when he saw it. You know you could retire early now, he said. I already did, I told him. After that, I found new rituals. Morning walks around the lake, coffee with Marta every Friday, reading to children at the library on Tuesdays. Life became simple again, in the best way. No more tiptoeing around tension. No more walking on eggshells in my own kitchen. But sometimes, at dusk, when the light softened and the wind carried the smell of wet pine, I'd feel a flicker of something nostalgia, maybe. Not for the house or even the life I'd lost, but for the version of me who thought she had to keep everyone happy to be loved. I pitied her, but I didn't miss her. In early August, Ethan came by again. This time he wasn't nervous. He brought Liam and baby Nora, both tumbling out of the car like sunshine. Julia wasn't with them. "Mom!" Liam shouted, running toward me with a grin that melted years off my heart. I knelt, catching him in my arms. His little body was warm, solid, full of forgiveness I hadn't asked for but suddenly needed. Ethan stood at the porch steps, holding Nora. "She wanted to meet you," he said softly. I took her in my arms. She blinked up at me with those same hazel eyes her father had as a boy. For a moment, the years between us folded away. We spent the afternoon together. I made lemonade. Ethan grilled on the porch while Liam ran circles around us. The world felt normal again, like the wound had finally scarred over instead of bleeding open. After dinner, when the kids were asleep on the couch, Ethan and I sat outside, listening to the crickets. The lake reflected the first few stars of the evening. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it."